Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who noticed things others missed. As a senior mechanic at auto repair, she possessed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose problems that left other technicians scratching their heads. Her colleagues often joked that she could hear a car's pain just by listening to its engine, but Sarah knew there was nothing mystical about her skills. 23 years of crawling under hoods, getting her hands dirty, and genuinely caring about the machines she worked on had taught her to recognize the subtle signs that spelled trouble. The morning the black sedan rolled into their shop, Sarah was underneath a pickup truck, wrestling with a stubborn transmission leak. The sound of tires on gravel made her pause, and she slid out from beneath the vehicle to see what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary car. The sedan looked immaculate from the outside, paint gleaming, chrome bumpers spotless, not a single dent or scratch visible anywhere on its surface. Most mechanics would have taken one look and assumed it was there for routine maintenance. But Sarah heard something else entirely. The engine made a sound that raised every alarm bell in her experienced mind. It wasn't loud or obviously wrong. In fact, most people would never notice it. But beneath the smooth purr of the motor, she detected an irregular rhythm, a subtle vibration that spoke of serious internal problems. Her trained ear picked up the telltale signs of metal fatigue, worn components operating beyond their safe limits, and systems that had been pushed far past their intended specifications. The driver who emerged from the sedan was a well-dressed businessman in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his problems solved quickly and efficiently. He introduced himself as Robert, explaining that he needed a routine oil change and general inspection before a long road trip he was planning with his family. His wife and 2 teenage children would be accompanying him on a cross-country drive to visit relatives, and he wanted to ensure the car was in perfect condition. Sarah watched as her supervisor, Mike, greeted the customer with his usual professional enthusiasm. Mike had inherited the shop from his father and ran it with integrity and fairness, but he lacked Sarah's mechanical intuition. To his eyes, the sedan represented a straightforward job: change the oil, check the fluids, inspect the obvious components, and send the customer on his way with a clean bill of health. As Mike and Robert discussed the details of the inspection, Sarah found herself drawn to the vehicle like a moth to flame. She circled it slowly, her experienced gaze taking in details that others would overlook. The tires showed unusual wear patterns that suggested alignment problems or possibly suspension issues. The exhaust pipe exhibited subtle discoloration that hinted at combustion irregularities. Most troubling of all, when she placed her hand on the hood, she could feel vibrations that spoke of serious engine problems lurking beneath the surface. Unable to remain silent, Sarah approached the 2 men. "Excuse me, mister," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that came from years of experience. "I couldn't help but notice some concerning signs with your vehicle. Before we proceed with the routine maintenance, I'd strongly recommend a comprehensive diagnostic inspection. I'm hearing some irregularities in the engine that suggest potential problems." Robert's expression shifted from polite attention to barely concealed irritation. His eyes took in Sarah's work clothes, the grease under her fingernails, and her gender, and his demeanor changed accordingly. "Miss," he said with condescending politeness, "I appreciate your concern, but I've been driving this car for 3 years without any problems. It runs perfectly fine, and I just need the basic service I requested." Mike, sensing potential conflict with a paying customer, quickly intervened. "Sarah's one of our best mechanics," he explained diplomatically, "but if you're comfortable with the routine service, that's exactly what we'll provide. We'll do a thorough visual inspection as part of the standard package." Sarah felt frustration building in her chest, but she pushed forward. "Sir, I understand the car seems fine to you, but I'm detecting vibrations and sounds that indicate serious internal problems. If you're planning a long trip with your family, especially with teenagers in the car, I really think we should take a deeper look. These kinds of issues can lead to catastrophic failure without warning." Robert's face flushed red, and his voice took on an edge of anger. "Look, lady, I didn't ask for your opinion. I know my own car, and it's running perfectly. I don't need some mechanic trying to drum up extra business by inventing problems that don't exist. Just do the oil change I requested and nothing more." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. In all her years at the shop, no one had ever questioned her integrity or suggested she would fabricate problems for financial gain. Mike knew her well enough to understand how deeply the comment wounded her, and he placed a protective hand on her shoulder. Mr. Mike said firmly, Sarah has never steered a customer wrong in all the years she's worked here. If she's expressing concern about your vehicle, it's because she genuinely believes there's a problem. But ultimately, the decision is yours. Robert waved dismissively. The decision is definitely mine, and I've made it. Basic service only. No diagnostic nonsense, no made-up problems, and no attempts to empty my wallet. I need this car back in 2 hours because I have important appointments this afternoon. Sarah made one final attempt. Sir, please understand that I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm worried about your family's safety. The sounds I'm hearing suggest problems with critical engine components that could fail catastrophically if something happens on the highway with your wife and children in the car. She let the implication hang in the air. That's enough, Robert snapped. I don't want to hear another word about imaginary problems. Do the job I paid for and keep your opinions to yourself. Defeated but not willing to give up entirely, Sarah retreated to her workbench and pulled out her phone. She quickly typed a detailed text message describing the vehicle's make, model, license plate number, and her specific concerns about the engine irregularities. She sent the message to her contact at the state police, Sergeant Jim, who had worked with her in the past when mechanical evidence was needed for accident investigations. The message read, Jim, got a black sedan here with serious engine problems, owner refusing diagnostics. Planning family road trip. Hearing metal fatigue and engine block, possible bearing failure imminent. License ABC 4729. Wanted this documented in case something happens. Jim responded within minutes. Got it. We'll flag the plate and route number if you can get travel details. Good catch as always. Sarah discreetly tried to overhear Robert's conversation with Mike about his travel plans, but the customer was being deliberately vague about his exact route and timeline. All she managed to learn was that he planned to leave early the following morning and expected to drive approximately 600 miles the first day. As Mike and their junior mechanic performed the routine oil change and inspection, Sarah watched from across the shop, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. Every fiber of her being screamed that they were making a terrible mistake by allowing that car to leave without a proper diagnosis. She had seen too many accidents, too many preventable tragedies, to ignore her instincts now. When the routine service was completed, Mike presented Robert with a basic report showing that all fluid levels were adequate, tire pressure was acceptable, and no obvious external problems were visible. Robert paid his bill with satisfaction, clearly pleased that his suspicions about Sarah's motives had been proven correct in his mind. As he prepared to leave, Sarah made one last desperate attempt. She approached the driver's side window as Robert started the engine, and the irregular sounds she had detected earlier seemed even more pronounced now that the fresh oil was circulating through the damaged components. Mister, she called out, but he ignored her completely, putting the car in reverse and backing out of the service bay. As he drove away, Sarah committed every detail of the vehicle to memory. The license plate number, the subtle way it seemed to favor one side, the faint blue tinge to the exhaust that suggested burning oil. Mike found her standing in the doorway, watching the sedan disappear down the street. You did everything you could, he said quietly. Some people just won't listen. That man is driving his family into danger, Sarah replied, her voice heavy with worry. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. That engine is going to fail, and when it does, people are going to get hurt. You documented your concerns with the state police, Mike reminded her. That's all you can do at this point. But Sarah knew documentation wouldn't save Robert's family if her worst fears came true. She spent the rest of the day distracted, constantly checking her phone for news reports and jumping every time the shop's phone rang. Her other customers that day received the benefit of her heightened attention to detail, as if she could somehow balance her failure with Robert by being extra vigilant with everyone else. That evening, Sarah went home to her small apartment and found herself unable to concentrate on anything. She tried watching television, but every commercial featuring families on road trips made her stomach clench with anxiety. She attempted to read a book, but the words blurred together as her mind kept returning to the sound of that engine and the dismissive way Robert had treated her warnings. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and returned to the shop. Using her key, she let herself into the darkened building and made her way to her workbench, where she pulled out a detailed automotive manual. For the next 3 hours, she documented everything she had observed about Robert's vehicle, creating a comprehensive technical report that detailed every sound, vibration, and visual cue that had triggered her concern. She wrote about the irregular firing pattern that suggested worn cylinder walls, the subtle knock that indicated bearing problems, and the way the engine seemed to work harder than it should to maintain normal operating parameters. She described the unusual tire wear that spoke of suspension problems and the exhaust discoloration that pointed to combustion irregularities. When she finished the report, Sarah felt slightly better, as if putting her concerns into technical language somehow gave them more weight and validity. She emailed the document to Sargent and kept a copy for her own records, though she desperately hoped she would never need to reference it again. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work early and immediately checked local news websites for any reports of highway accidents or breakdowns. Finding nothing, she allowed herself a moment of hope that perhaps she had been wrong, that her instincts had failed her for the first time in decades. But as the day progressed, and she went through the motions of working on other vehicles, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, a family was driving toward disaster in a car that should never have been allowed to leave their shop. Every time her phone buzzed with a text message or call, she expected to hear the news she was dreading. Mike noticed her distraction and tried to reassure her, but Sarah's experience had taught her to trust her mechanical intuition above all else. She had seen too many cases where ignored warning signs led to tragedy, too many situations where a small problem that could have been easily fixed became a catastrophic failure that changed lives forever. As closing time approached, Sarah made one final check of the news websites and found the call came at 7:30 the next morning, jolting Sarah from her restless sleep. She fumbled for her phone, her heart already racing before she even saw Sargent's name on the display. The sick feeling in her stomach told her everything she needed to know before she answered. "Sarah, it's Jim. I need you to sit down." She was already sitting on the edge of her bed, but she gripped the phone. "Tell me." "Interstate 40, about 300 miles east of your location. Major engine failure on a black sedan, license plate ABC 4729. The car is registered to Robert." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "The family, are they?" "They're alive," Jim said quickly, "but it was close, really close." The story that emerged over the next several minutes painted a picture that was both better and worse than Sarah's worst fears. The family had made it approximately halfway through their planned first day of driving when catastrophic engine failure struck without warning. They had been traveling at highway speeds in the left lane, passing a slow-moving truck, when the engine block cracked completely. In an instant, Robert's perfectly fine vehicle had transformed into a 2-ton projectile hurtling down the interstate with no power and rapidly failing systems. The power steering died first, making the car nearly impossible to control. The power brakes followed seconds later, leaving Robert fighting to slow the vehicle using only the emergency brake and whatever momentum he could scrub off by letting the car coast. "The amazing thing," Jim continued, "is that Robert managed to get the car across 4 lanes of traffic and onto the shoulder without hitting anyone. But Sarah, if this had happened in a different location, if they'd been going around a curve or in heavy traffic or on one of those mountain passes they were planning to drive through later in their trip." Sarah closed her eyes, imagining the scene. A family of 4, trapped in a powerless vehicle, completely at the mercy of physics and the skill of a driver who had never faced such a crisis. What exactly failed? According to the preliminary report from the responding officer who happens to have some mechanical knowledge, it looks like a complete engine block failure. Massive oil leak, coolant everywhere, metal debris scattered across the highway. The engine basically destroyed itself from the inside out. "The sounds I heard," Sarah whispered. "The vibrations, that was the engine block developing stress fractures." "The state police investigator wants to talk to you about your observations. Apparently, engine failures like this don't usually happen without warning signs that a qualified mechanic should have detected during routine service." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Jim, they brought that car to us less than 24 hours before this happened. I tried to warn them. I tried to convince them to let me do a proper diagnostic, but the customer refused. He accused me of trying to scam him." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Do you have documentation of your concerns?" "I sent you that text message, and I wrote up a detailed technical report. I emailed you a copy early this morning." "Good, you're going to need that." The insurance companies are already starting their investigation, and there are going to be questions about whether the shop that serviced the vehicle should have detected the problem. Sarah's blood ran cold. The possibility of legal liability had never occurred to her, but now it loomed like a dark cloud over everything. We only did routine maintenance. The customer specifically refused additional diagnostics. I believe you, and your documentation will help prove that you tried to do the right thing. But you need to be prepared for some difficult questions. After ending the call with Jim, Sarah immediately phoned Mike. Her supervisor's voice was groggy with sleep until she explained what had happened, and then he was instantly alert and concerned. Jesus, Sarah, are you absolutely certain this is the same car? License plate matches, make and model match, timing matches. It's the same vehicle, Mike. Mike was quiet for a long moment. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Don't talk to anyone about this except me and our insurance company until we figure out exactly what our exposure is. Get to the shop as soon as you can. We need to pull all the documentation from yesterday's service and make sure everything is properly recorded. Sarah arrived at auto repair 30 minutes later to find Mike already there, surrounded by paperwork and looking worried. Together, they reviewed every detail of Robert's visit, from the initial conversation to the final payment and departure. The work order clearly states that the customer requested routine maintenance only, Mike said, pointing to the handwritten notes. And look here, you wrote in the comments section that you recommended additional diagnostic work, but the customer declined. Sarah nodded. I always document things like that. I learned years ago to cover myself when customers refuse necessary work. Your recommendation is clearly noted, along with your specific concerns about engine irregularities, and you signed and dated it. Mike looked relieved. This should protect us legally, but I'm more worried about our reputation. When word gets out that a car serviced here suffered catastrophic failure the next day. People won't care that the customer refused our recommendations, Sarah finished. They'll just remember that we touched the car before it failed. The morning brought a steady stream of phone calls as news of the highway incident spread through various channels. A reporter from the local newspaper wanted to know about the shop's role in servicing the vehicle. An insurance investigator requested copies of all documentation related to the incident. The State Police Traffic Division needed Sarah's technical report for their accident analysis. Most difficult of all was the call from Robert himself. I want to talk to that female mechanic who worked on my car, he demanded when Mike answered the phone. Mike hesitated. Mister, I'm very sorry to hear about your family's frightening experience. Before we discuss any details, I need to contact our insurance company and... I don't want to talk to you or your insurance company. I want to talk to the mechanic who told me there were problems with my car. I need to know exactly what she saw. Mike looked across the shop at Sarah, who was pretending to focus on a brake repair while obviously listening to every word of the conversation. Sir, I don't think it's appropriate for us to have detailed discussions about the incident until all the investigations are complete. Look, I'm not calling to blame anyone or start legal trouble. I just need to understand what happened. My wife and kids were in that car. They could have been killed because I was too stubborn and proud to listen to someone who knew what she was talking about. The anguish in Robert's voice was unmistakable, and Sarah felt her anger toward him dissolve instantly. She walked over to Mike and held out her hand for the phone. Mister, this is Sarah Martinez. Are you and your family okay? We're physically fine, but we're all pretty shaken up. Ms. Martinez, I owe you an apology, a big one. I was rude and dismissive yesterday, and I nearly got my family killed because of my attitude. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Sir, I'm just glad everyone is safe. That's all that matters to me. But I need to understand what you knew. What did you hear in my car that I couldn't hear? What signs did you see that I missed? Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah carefully explained the technical details of what she had observed. She described the subtle engine knock that indicated bearing problems, the irregular firing pattern that suggested internal wear, and the vibration patterns that pointed to stress fractures in critical components. All of these symptoms together painted a picture of an engine that was operating under extreme stress, she explained. The components were worn beyond their safe operating limits, and failure was inevitable. The only question was when and where it would happen. Robert listened without interruption. occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated he was genuinely trying to understand the mechanical principles involved. "How long would a proper diagnostic have taken?" he asked finally. "About 4 hours for a comprehensive inspection of the type I wanted to perform. It would have involved computer diagnostics, internal engine inspection through the oil filler, and stress testing of the major systems." "And what would you have found?" Sarah sighed. "Based on what I observed externally and the subsequent failure pattern, I believe we would have discovered that your engine had accumulated far more wear than normal for a 3-year-old vehicle. Either it had been severely overworked at some point, or there was a manufacturing defect that caused accelerated wear of the internal components." "The car has been perfectly reliable for 3 years," Robert said. "I never had any problems, never noticed any warning signs." "That's actually part of the problem," Sarah explained. "Modern engines are so sophisticated that they can compensate for internal problems far longer than older engines could. The computer systems adjust fuel mixture, timing, and other parameters to maintain smooth operation even when components are failing. By the time symptoms become noticeable to the average driver, the damage is often irreversible." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "So when you tried to warn me yesterday, you were potentially saving my family's lives." "I was trying to prevent exactly what happened to you. I've seen too many preventable accidents over the years, mister. When I notice warning signs, I can't remain silent, even when customers don't want to hear what I have to say. And I treated you like you were trying to cheat me." Sarah felt the weight of professional frustration that had built up over decades of dealing with similar situations. "Sir, I've been a mechanic for 23 years. I've worked on everything from motorcycles to heavy trucks. In all that time, I have never, not once, recommended unnecessary work to a customer. When I tell someone their vehicle has a problem, it's because I genuinely believe their safety is at risk." "I believe you, and I'm sorry I didn't listen." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Robert asking detailed questions about automotive maintenance and warning signs that drivers should watch for. Sarah found herself impressed by his genuine desire to learn from the experience rather than simply assign blame. "Ms. Martinez," Robert said as the call was ending, "I want you to know that I'm going to make sure everyone understands that you tried to prevent this accident. If anyone suggests that your shop was responsible for what happened, they'll hear from me personally about how you tried to warn me and I refused to listen." "I appreciate that, mister, but I'm just glad your family is safe." "We're safe because of your expertise and my lucky driving, but it could have been so much worse." After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly at her workbench, processing the emotional weight of the conversation. Mike approached and sat down beside her. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Relieved that they're okay, frustrated that it had to happen at all, and honestly a little vindicated that my concerns were justified. You saved that family's life, you know. If you hadn't documented your observations and contacted the state police, and if Robert hadn't been an experienced driver with good reflexes." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't save anyone. I tried to prevent a dangerous situation and failed. They saved themselves through quick thinking and good luck." "But your warning to the police meant they were prepared when the accident happened. The responding officers knew to look for mechanical failure instead of driver error, which probably saved valuable time in the investigation." As the day progressed, Sarah found herself thinking about all the other times over the years when she had detected potential problems that customers chose to ignore. How many other families had driven away from shops in dangerous vehicles because they didn't trust the expertise of the mechanics trying to help them? How many accidents could have been prevented if communication between mechanics and customers was better? But she also thought about the customers who had listened to her warnings over the years, the families who had avoided tragedy because they trusted her professional judgment even when it cost them money they hadn't planned to spend. Those success stories rarely made the news, but they represented the real value of having experienced, caring professionals in the automotive service industry. The incident would become a defining moment in Sarah's career, but not in the way the investigation that followed the highway incident would ultimately reveal details that shocked everyone involved, including Sarah herself. What had initially appeared to be a straightforward case of mechanical failure evolved into something far more complex and disturbing. 3 days after the engine failure, Sergeant Jim called Sarah with unexpected news. The preliminary forensic analysis of engine is back, and you need to hear this. The failure wasn't caused by normal wear and tear or even manufacturing defects. Sarah was underneath a customer's truck, but she immediately rolled out and grabbed the phone. What do you mean? Someone deliberately tampered with that engine. The forensic mechanic found evidence of metal shavings that were intentionally introduced into the oil system, probably during a previous service. The shavings caused accelerated wear of the bearings and cylinder walls, which led to the catastrophic failure you predicted. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Someone sabotaged Robert's car. That's exactly what it looks like. And here's the really disturbing part. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The type and amount of contamination was precisely calculated to cause failure after a specific amount of driving time. This wasn't random vandalism. This was attempted murder disguised as mechanical failure. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If she hadn't detected the engine irregularities and documented her concerns, the investigators might never have looked beyond the obvious conclusion of accidental mechanical failure. Robert and his family could have died, and their killer would have gotten away with what appeared to be a tragic accident. Jim, I need to know, where was Robert's car serviced before he brought it to us? That's what we're investigating now. According to Robert, he had the oil changed at a quick lube place about 2 weeks before visiting your shop. We're pulling their records and interviewing their employees. Sarah's mind raced through the technical implications. The timing makes sense. 2 weeks would be exactly the right amount of time for metal contamination to cause the kind of damage I observed. The sabotage probably happened during that oil change. We need you to provide a detailed technical explanation of how this type of sabotage would work and what signs a qualified mechanic might observe. Your documentation from the day Robert brought the car in may be crucial evidence in a criminal prosecution. Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with investigators to create a comprehensive technical analysis of the sabotage method. The perpetrator had introduced fine metal shavings into the engine oil, knowing that the contaminated lubricant would gradually destroy the engine's internal components. It was a diabolical method because it left no obvious external evidence and created a delayed action effect that made it nearly impossible to trace back to the source. The really scary part, Sarah explained to the investigators, is that most mechanics wouldn't have caught this during routine service. The engine would have seemed fine to anyone doing a standard oil change or basic inspection. You'd need someone with extensive experience and really good diagnostic skills to notice the subtle signs of internal damage. The investigation into the quick lube shop where Robert's car had been serviced revealed a shocking story of workplace revenge gone terribly wrong. A recently fired employee had returned to the shop after hours and gained access using a key he had failed to return. Security cameras captured him entering Robert's car and spending approximately 15 minutes working under the hood. Had been terminated from his job at the quick lube shop for repeatedly arriving late and showing poor attitude toward customers. According to his former, he had made angry comments about getting back at people who had treated him unfairly. Unfortunately, Robert had been one of the customers who had complained about rude behavior during a previous visit. The guy picked a victim basically at random, Jim explained to Sarah during one of their many conversations about the case. Robert complained about poor service, got fired, and decided to get revenge by sabotaging a customer's car. He probably never considered that there would be children in the vehicle when his sabotage took effect. Sarah felt sick thinking about how close had come to succeeding with his plan. If Robert had been driving alone, or if the failure had happened in a more dangerous location. We'd probably be investigating multiple homicides instead of attempted murder, Jim agreed. Your detection of the engine problems and Robert's driving skill are the only reasons this family is still alive. The revelation that Robert's engine failure had been caused by deliberate sabotage transformed Sarah's role from potential liability in an accident to key witness in a criminal prosecution. Her technical expertise and careful documentation became crucial elements in building the case against. During the trial preparation, Sarah worked closely with prosecutors to explain the technical aspects of the sabotage in terms that a jury could understand. She created detailed diagrams showing how metal contamination in engine oil gradually destroys internal components, and she about the specific signs she had observed that indicated severe internal damage. The defendant's actions were essentially the mechanical equivalent of putting poison in someone's food, the prosecutor explained to the jury, using one of Sarah's analogies. He introduced a substance that he knew would cause catastrophic failure, and he timed it precisely so the victims would be far from help when the attack took effect. Robert proved to be a compelling witness, describing his initial dismissal of Sarah's warnings and his growing realization that she had been trying to save his family's life. His testimony about the terrifying experience of losing power and brakes while traveling at highway speed with his wife and children in the car left several jury members visibly shaken. "I was arrogant and dismissive toward Ms. Martinez, Robert. I assumed she was trying to take advantage of me financially, when in reality she was the only person who recognized that my family was in mortal danger. If I had listened to her advice, we could have discovered the sabotage before it nearly killed us." Sarah's testimony proved to be the technical foundation of the prosecution's case. She methodically explained how she had detected evidence of severe engine damage during her initial examination of Robert's vehicle, how she had tried to convince him to authorize diagnostic work that would have revealed the sabotage, and how she had documented her concerns in anticipation of potential problems. "In 23 years as a professional mechanic," Sarah told the jury, "I have never encountered a more dangerous situation. The engine in Mr.'s vehicle was operating so far beyond safe parameters that catastrophic failure was inevitable. The only questions were when and where it would happen." The defense attorney attempted to argue that it only intended to cause expensive car trouble, not to endanger lives. But Sarah's technical testimony made it clear that anyone with basic mechanical knowledge would understand that the type of sabotage had performed could easily result in deadly highway accidents. "Introducing metal contamination into engine oil is not a prank," Sarah explained patiently to the defense attorney during cross-examination. "It's a method of causing complete mechanical failure that puts everyone in the vehicle at extreme risk. Any mechanic would know that engine failure at highway speeds can be fatal." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts, including attempted murder, sabotage, and reckless endangerment. Was sentenced to 15 years in prison, sending a strong message about the serious criminal consequences of tampering with vehicle safety systems. The case attracted significant media attention, both locally and nationally, as people grappled with the disturbing idea that routine automotive service could be used as a weapon. Sarah found herself in the uncomfortable position of being hailed as a hero while feeling like she had simply done her job as a responsible professional. "I don't want to be famous for this," she told Mike after a particularly overwhelming day of media interviews. "I just want people to understand how important it is to listen to qualified mechanics when we express safety concerns." The publicity surrounding the case had an unexpected positive effect on auto repair's business. Customers began specifically requesting Sarah's services, knowing that her careful attention to detail and willingness to speak up about safety issues could potentially save their lives. Word spread throughout the community that Sarah Martinez was the mechanic you wanted examining your family's vehicle. More importantly, the case sparked broader conversations about automotive safety and the relationship between mechanics and customers. Professional organizations began developing educational programs to help consumers understand when they should trust professional recommendations about vehicle maintenance and safety. Sarah received letters from mechanics across the country, sharing their own stories of customers who had ignored safety warnings and subsequently experienced preventable accidents. The letters reinforced her belief that many automotive accidents could be avoided if communication between professionals and customers improved. Robert became one of Sarah's strongest advocates, frequently telling people about how her expertise and persistence had saved his family. He insisted on bringing his replacement vehicle to auto repair for all future service, and he never questioned Sarah's recommendations about maintenance or safety work. "Ms. Martinez taught me that mechanics aren't trying to cheat customers when they recommend additional work," Robert explained to a local news reporter. "They're trying to keep families safe. I'll never make the mistake of ignoring professional safety advice again." The incident also led to changes in industry practices at quick lube shops and other automotive service facilities. Many businesses implemented additional security measures to prevent unauthorized access by former employees, and some began requiring more thorough background checks for workers who would have access to customer vehicles. Sarah continued working at auto repair, but the experience had changed her approach to customer interactions. She became even more insistent about documenting safety concerns and more aggressive about trying to convince customers to address potential problems before they became dangerous. "I learned that I can't save every family from mechanical failure," she reflected months later, "but I can make sure that, when I detect danger, I do everything in my power to prevent tragedy. Sometimes that means being more forceful with customers than they might like, but I'd rather deal with an angry customer than a dead family." The case of Robert's sabotaged vehicle became a defining moment not just for Sarah's career, but for broader public understanding of automotive safety and the critical role that experienced mechanics play in preventing accidents. It demonstrated that behind every routine oil change and basic inspection, there are skilled professionals whose expertise and dedication can literally mean the difference between life and death for the families they serve. Years later, Sarah would still receive occasional calls from Robert, updating her on his family's activities and thanking her once again for her life-saving intervention. These calls served as powerful reminders that her work was about much more than fixing machines. It was about protecting the people who depended on those machines to get them safely through their daily lives. The story of the car Sarah warned them about became a powerful example of how professional expertise, careful attention to detail, and the courage to speak up about safety concerns can prevent tragedy and bring criminals to justice. It proved that sometimes the most important part of a mechanic's job isn't the work they do under the hood, but the warnings they give to the people who drive away initially feared. Instead of damaging her reputation, it would become a powerful example of the importance of trusting qualified mechanics and the potential consequences of ignoring professional advice about vehicle safety. Nothing, she allowed herself a small measure of hope as she locked up the shop and headed home, but deep in her heart, she knew this story was far from over. Somewhere out there, Robert was driving his family toward an appointment with mechanical failure, and despite all her efforts to prevent it, Sarah felt powerless to stop what was coming.